This is Kelly.
And this is Amy.
And you're listening to Diary of a Death Investigator. We have another special guest this week. I shouldn't say another special guest, but Mama Mia has been the only guest that we've had on. But we're going to introduce the world to Papa B. You want to say hi?
Hi.
We've been giving him instructions on how the podcasting world works, but
I'm trying to take this serious.
But you and Amy have something in common, which is why we thought it would be cool to have you on. You worked in the world of law enforcement.
That I did for 30 years, 28.5 to be exact.
And we get to hear all of your stories because you relive them with us. But I think it would be nice to relive them with the world.
Well, I've got a couple good ones, but I don't have too many. I mean, it was pretty mundane, really. It's not as exciting, and I think law enforcement is not as exciting in shoot 'em up, bang 'em up stuff and chases all the time. It's not like that at all. Sometimes it's very boring, but these are probably some of the more exciting times, to say the least. So, there are very few of those.
When did you start?
I started in January of 1973. Those are good times. Those are the good old days.
I wouldn't know. As we were just discussing, I wasn't born in the 70s.
Okay, I find that hard to believe. I'm going to check your birth certificate later. But anyway, I don't want to give you a bad time, Kelly. Age is very sensitive to you.
Yeah, it is. Yes. But the 70s was known for what I'm like super into is the serial killer era. Did you hear about any of the serial killers in the 70s?
We heard a lot about them, but we never had any cases in San Jose. We're very lucky. Homicide rate in San Jose, for the most part, was very low. And per capita and stuff, we had one of the lowest rates. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I guess it's good. But we didn't have any serial killers in my career that I know of. Maybe one that was 3 family members were killed, but that was it. And the guy ended up killing himself. So it really wasn't a real spree or anything. But we really weren't out there hunting serial killers and having that terror or that fear of a serial killer out there among us. And I guess we're very lucky. But I don't remember any cases in the 70s and even in the 80s and 90s of any serial killers in San Jose that we've had. And I think that's a good thing. But anyway, most of our homicides were very mundane in the sense that we're usually a known suspect. It was usually a family member, a family situation, a neighbor situation, there was known suspect. Very few of our homicides went unsolved. Very straightforward for the most part.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, that's my thinking anyway. So we didn't have any of that fear or that headline news type situations where there's a serial killer out among us. And like I say, I think that was a good thing.
Do you think that was because of social media and the news? Because we didn't have the internet back then, so maybe we didn't know. I mean, you guys knew what was going on in San Jose, but just like outlining areas.
Well, that's very interesting that you'd ask that. The news only got what we gave them. And that's very true. The news only got what we put out in a press release. And those press releases were very informal, basic, and very little information was given out on those news releases and a few lines, and that was it. Most of the police department was very skeptical of the news in those days, and they probably still are, and didn't trust the news and didn't want to get anybody in trouble or anything. And they were always thinking like that in those terms. And I think there was very little information. They're just giving out the basic information, and there wasn't a lot of information given out. So there wasn't any real big newsworthy type cases the couple that I was involved in were very newsworthy and front page news, but it was just due to the fact of the age of the victims and the senselessness of the whole thing type thing.
Did you ever deal with anybody like Amy? Like a death investigator?
Coroner. They call them here the coroner's investigators. Yeah, we had some personalities that were dealing with death all the time and dealing with the ugliness of it and that everything goes along with being a death investigator. She's probably got some good stories too, but it's not one of those type of feel-good type of jobs, I think. But yeah, I had a couple good ones with some of the death investigators. And the one that I always remember it was a family type of homicide, and a brother killed another brother, and they killed his brother. It was on New Year's Eve, and the coroner's investigator showed up, and he could barely walk. He shouldn't have been driving, drove there. And then he got out of his car and kind of stumbled out of his car, and I was outside waiting for him and going to direct him in. And he had a hard time finding the front sidewalk or finding the sidewalk up to the door. And he'd been partying and very heartily. And anyway,
Yeah.
He walked in, and normally they carry a bag of stuff, their equipment and stuff. He had no bag. He just walked up. He had nothing with him, and I'm thinking, sir, where's all your equipment? Where's your notepad?
Sir, where are your gloves?
Where's your camera? Where's all your stuff? Yeah, and he goes, I don't need that stuff. Anyway, it was a big hit. Yeah, he was a big hit. So anyway, I called my sergeant up, and sergeant came in, and they made a phone call and got another coroner's investigator. And he got in trouble, and I hate to burn him, but, it's pretty serious stuff here. We got an investigation. And he's got document stuff and do his job. And the homicide investigators were upset anyway because New Year's Eve, right? They didn't want to be called back in and hear the coroner's investigator and was out partying, and there probably shouldn't have been. I guess he was on call and got a little carried away at the party and figured he wasn't going to get the call. And sure enough, he gets the call. It was his turn. I got the page. I think we used pagers those days. Is that right?
Yeah.
Does that sound about right? I know that.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, yeah. He got paged.
She wasn't born in the 70s either.
Okay, well, they got paged in those days, and so they were probably. I think he was at a party. The story goes, and he was partying pretty hard. He took some heat for that one, but anyway, they got a new coroner's investigator, and the other coroner's investigator probably wasn't happy because he was pulled away probably from some type of. Some type of event that he was at and supposedly have a night off, and here he gets called in. So they were upset with him, to say the least. And the probably guy, he took some serious heat on that one. But I never did hear if there was any discipline or anything, but I imagine there was some type of reprimand or something that happened as a result of that. But I'll never forget that because it kind of worried me as it took this pretty serious, and they got this homicide and stuff, and here the coroner's investigator walks up, and he can hardly walk, and he shouldn't have been driving. As a matter of fact, they did have somebody out to get him and drove the county car home and make sure that he got home okay. But anyway, very interesting that situation happened. But anyway, that's one of my memories of the coroner's.
So not necessarily very good.
And I've had some other good ones. I had another one that coroner's investigator came, and I wasn't sure that this was a homicide. And I was told by a witness and by a family member that the guy had fallen, had a really nasty head wound. And I was thinking, I don't know. I just don't know. So I called out the coroner's investigator and have to take a look. And he was kind of upset at me because usually it's a sure thing. There's a knife in the guy or there's a bullet hole or something. But all this guy had was a head wound. He'd fallen and hit his head on the table and then hit the floor. And there was I think that's what happened. He hit his head. And then I think what I saw two head wounds, and I kind of trying to figure it all out. Anyway, make a long story short, the coroner's investigator got there and said, no, this is blunt force trauma. He got hit with something before he went down. So anyway, they did it. So he changed it around and saved me because it was another family member, and somebody didn't get away with murder, but it was actually murder. So anyway, the guy, he did get hit on the head and knocked down, and he did hit the table. Was a result of, but the first shot was he got hit with a pipe.
Whoa!
Yeah, it knocked him down.
I think either way on those, we always still investigate falls though, because those are still considered accidents. So we have to determine if it's due to a head bleed or if there was an event that caused them to have a fall, which then caused a head bleed. So either way, it's a good call to have them come out to a scene.
And thank God I did that because it covered me too, because, you let somebody get away with homicide, and especially in a situation like that with the crime scene and everything that's there at the crime scene. And they pretty much got that. They really solve a lot of the crimes as a result of gathering evidence, of course, at the crime scene and the photographs and all that stuff. And that we wouldn't have had any of that stuff if I just said, he fell and took a quick report and, left. And they give us, they used to give us these Kodak cameras. They had the cartridges in them for the film, and they take halfway decent pictures, but nothing that you'd want to use. When the crime scene guys come in, they have this heavy-duty photography equipment and some heavy-duty camera equipment and some real good quality stuff. And they issued to the beat cop these little Kodak cameras that you put a cartridge in and you take a picture. And I remember taking a few pictures, and thank God the case didn't stop right there. It went on. So they used my pictures, 2 or 3 of the pictures, but they also came in with the crime scene pictures and stuff and put the case together. But I could just see me trying to work a homicide with these case with the 2 pictures or 3 pictures that I'd taken of the body laying there in a pool of blood, right? So anyway, it was kind of saved me too. Thank God it worked out. So anyway.
Did they teach you how to use the cameras beforehand?
Not really. I mean, they're little Kodaks. I mean, you aim it and shoot, right? You press a button.
That wasn't your priority, I'm sure. It was like taking pictures at a scene because you guys did so much.
I mean, it's not anything compared to what the crime scene guys had, though. You know what I mean? They had professional equipment and high-end stuff, and they were called beat packs, and there was a little carrying case, and in the carrying case was some extra batteries and a Kodak camera, a little Kodak Instamatic camera, and that's our crime scene stuff. And it was good for accidents and that type of thing, but you didn't want to try to get detailed photographs from a Kodak Instamatic camera, right? It was kind of interesting. And I kind of thank God made the right decision and got away with that one, because I could have taken some serious heat on that one and let a homicide get by.
Who did it?
Older brother. Most of the stuff that I was involved in was brothers and sisters and brothers and sisters and sisters, moms and dads. It was all family-oriented stuff that most of the stuff I got involved with.
Well, we just had the holidays. We understand that.
Yeah, and that's right. As you all know, the homicide rate goes up in December. And
holidays.
Stuff, and, holidays.
Especially when alcohol is involved and they have party.
Alcohol and other chemicals. Nowadays.
Yeah,
yes.
that's true. Yeah.
Yes.
When money's involved and alcohol's involved and holidays, everyone's mad at everybody. So.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
You didn't see any spousal? I didn't hear any spousal.
Oh, those were so common. I mean, those were common. You know, in my day, this was before domestic violence. In the 70s, there was no such thing as domestic violence. You slap your wife around, they'd separate you, go stay with your brother, or get out of the house for a couple hours, go shopping, go down to the bar, drink, do something, get out of the house. You know, that's how we solve those cases.
And probably the same couples you see all the time, over and over again.
And it's, and it's a repeat type thing. It was every Friday night. Joe would come home drunk from after work, go drink with the boys after work, come home, beat on the wife, beat on his girlfriend, whatever. And the kind of funny thing about that was, though, 17, 18 years later, I'm working in the same area. Guess what? 19, 20-year-old son now. I'm getting calls on 19, 20-year-old son who's beating on his girlfriend. Because that's all he saw when he was at home with mom and dad.
Right.
And his dad beating up mom. Now he's beating up on his girlfriend and stuff. And I've had a number of cases like that. It's kind of a thing that you can really see where they learn other
learned behavior.
The things they learn from mom and dad. Anyway, that was always interesting. But those days, this was before domestic violence went into effect. Domestic violence changed everything. And that was our technique, was separate and get them away from each other, and no arrests were very seldom made, due to the fact that the wife, usually 2 months down the road when it went to court, would not testify against her husband anyway, her boyfriend, whoever it might be. So why bother? And that was the thing. And we just separate and conquer type thing, and make sure they don't kill each other that night. Maybe they'll kill each other tomorrow, but at least on your shift, they won't kill each other. That was the worst thing, that repeat call back to the 2 hours later. So as long as you got them separated and they didn't kill each other that night, and I got to go home, I was satisfied.
I get that. It's like you're off shift in an hour. You just got to make it work for another hour. So
exactly. As long as I can get out of here and get home, I'm fine.
Yep. Next shift's problem.
Next exactly. And that happened a lot, but that's the way things were done. And domestic violence was just not a thing in those days. It was just this whole separate thing. And then when domestic violence came in, and you look at your wife cross-eyed, you can be arrested. It kind of went just from one extreme to the other extreme. It got really, there's some real touchy ones there too, where, and I had cases where in domestic violence where I'd arrest both of them, where the female was also aggressive, or was the aggressor. And I'd arrest her, and come to find out the male is aggressive too. And the number of cases I had, I'd arrest both mom and dad, and husband and wife type thing, or girlfriend and boyfriend. So anyway, that domestic violence changed a lot, and the way we handle things. And probably it's a good thing, because I think it did deter a lot of, seem to think that, I would hope that somebody would think about that before you hit somebody or assaulted somebody, that you would think that I can go to jail for this. And I'm kind of glad. I'm very, don't get me wrong, I laugh about it, but domestic violence is a serious thing, and I'm glad that they've got it pretty well handled now, where you look cross-eyed at the lady, or the lady looks cross-eyed at the guy, you can be arrested.
Well, and it affects the kids too. I had a case of a guy, they were having a huge party. It was supposed to be the guy's birthday party, and they were out in a barn, of course, all drinking. And there was a known history there of domestic violence, and they got in a huge argument. It was like 3:00 in the morning. And of course, all the little kids were in there too in the barn. And then parents started fighting, and then somehow the dad got a hold of a gun, and he, for whatever reason, says something to her about, well, I'll take care of this problem, shoots a gun off into the air, and then turns the gun on himself and shoots himself in front of the babies. So
that answered all the questions. That just solved all the problems, didn't it? Right there.
Yeah,
I just
so-
what a mess, huh?
in front of all of their friends and in front of the kids. So yeah, what's better there in that situation?
Unbelievable. That's the other thing now is they've changed the law too. And I think there's some, I'm not very up on these now because I haven't worked for such a long time, but they were all new when I was coming on, when I was just before I retired. But prior domestic violence cases, and you cannot possess a gun or have a gun in the household or something. There's a couple of new laws like that, and it's probably a good thing. And I know that they can be people can be arrested now, even having a gun in certain situations if there's previous, like you were talking about, prior domestic violence history. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. That's how a lot of the calls for service in my day were domestic violence. When domestic violence first came in, and there was just every other call was mostly involved with the family or involved with domestic violence. And then domestic violence can also mean not a husband and wife, but there's also cases where big brother beating up on little sister, they turn that domestic violence also. Anything that's happening in the house within the family sometimes. So there's a lot of calls. There was more and more calls when domestic violence went into effect. Anyway, very interesting history, but we did things so much differently in the 70s than is done now. It's probably a good thing, but it was a whole different world in those days.
Well, you didn't have DNA testing either.
No, there was no forensics. There was no forensics for the most part. It was all eyewitness. It was all pictures, photographs. They would take blood, of course, from a victim and a suspects and check for, chemicals and stuff, alcohol, drugs, that type of thing. That was always been in effect. But for the most part, there was nothing having to do with DNA. You didn't even think about, and I laugh now and I see the criminals wearing gloves and all that, not to, get in DNA and fingerprints and stuff. And I always laugh at that because my day, that wasn't, nobody cared about that because it was very tough to get fingerprints anyway. But for the most part, there was no such thing as the DNA. It was a big thing now. Yeah. All you have to do is just leave some type of secretion and they're going to find you. So anyway, I think that's a great thing for law enforcement, a big aid to law enforcement. But yeah, that was just I never dealt with that too much because it was before my time.
What do you think your most memorable case was?
Well, it's kind of let me explain it to you. It's kind of a long one, but it was late in the shift. I was working day shift and I didn't like days because you had to get up 5 o'clock in the morning and you work 10-hour shift. So if I started at 6, then I'd get off at 4. I think that day I started at 7. I was supposed to get off at 5. And Marianne and I had planned something. It was, why I remember it too, is on one of the kids' birthdays. It might have been on Jeff's birthday. I don't know. We had something planned and I wanted to get home. I mean, I didn't want any late calls. I didn't want to deal with any of this stuff. I just wanted to get home. And I'm starting to head in. I'm working East San Jose and I'm just starting to head over to 101, get on 101 and go home. And I get a call of a missing 10-year-old. And it's 4 o'clock, and she normally comes home from school, and she gets off at 2:30, and she walks a route. She's like 4 blocks from the school. She lives there, 2 or 3 blocks from the school, and mom and dad, wait for her, and she usually at home by 2:40, 2:45, and it's now 3:15, 3:30, and she's not home. So they call in, and I remember the exact time of the call. The call came in at like 3:45, and I got the call at a little bit before 4, and I was like starting to head in. Oh man. And I know that it's a 10-year-old girl, so it's going to take some time. Got to find the girl. This is my thinking. And I'm going to have to call a bunch of units in and do searches and stuff. I'm not going to get home till 6 or 7. So I'm kind of pissed off now. Darn it. In the swing shift, the guys that relieved me are not out yet. And so I got to go back and handle this big long case. And I'm kind of upset at that. And I get there and the dad is there and he's obviously very upset. He's outside the house and he's saying that, hey, she's a good girl and never had any problems with her. Everything is fine at home. And this is very unusual. She's never late. So anyway, I think, oh God, here we go. So anyway, I think that something's going on. She's probably with one of her friends or something. So I says, okay, you stay at home here and I'm going to cruise around the neighborhood and look around for her. So I start cruising go over to the school, make sure that she went to school. She did go to school and she exited school because a lot of times they'll tell mom and dad they didn't go, they didn't go to school or something. They're out messing around or they skip school or whatever. But I talked to the school officials. Yeah, she did go to school. She was here. And the teacher confirmed that she got out with the rest of the kids. So anyway, I started cruising around, I got out of the car and walked around a little bit on her path. Didn't see anything unusual. and talked to some neighbors and that type of thing. And I'm about ready to call in for some more units. And there's an abandoned house right in their path. And I better go in and check this house. So anyway, I went in the house and it was a mess. I mean, it was a party house. And somebody just rented it or something and walked out. And the kids had taken over and the landlord wasn't keeping it up, that type of thing. Graffiti all over the walls, front doors open, holes in the wall, party, beer cans, booze cans all over the place. Obviously a party house and no furniture. Just the house was a mess. So I walk through and I don't see anything. And so I go in the garage. The sun's just starting to go down. It's early, like I say, early afternoon, 4:30. The sun's starting to go down. It's a little bit dark in the garage. I can't see. So I walk over to the side garage door and there's a blind on it and push it up to let some light in so I can check the garage out. And I'm just about ready to walk out too. I wasn't even going to check the garage. And anyway, I remember that thought in my mind. And anyway, I flipped the screen up, turned around, and there she's laying on the floor, on the garage floor. So anyway, and I hadn't had a lot of dead bodies and stuff. And I was kind of hesitant. And I poked her a little bit and yelled at her and, get up, that type of thing. Are you okay? And I felt for her pulse. I couldn't feel any pulse. She felt kind of cold, but she was still warm. And this was 4:30. And I think she got out of school at 2:30. So she'd only been, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half. She'd been laying there. I found this out, of course, all later. But anyway, I can't revive her. I can't get her going. So anyway, I go back out to the car. We didn't have hand packs in those days. So I had to walk back out to the car and I called for help. Give me some units up here. I got a 10-year-old victim. And so anyway, the first officer that gets there is an older guy. And he'd been around for a while. And thank God, I says, go in and check and make sure she's dead. I'm not sure. And I checked for pulse and stuff. And we'd call for an ambulance, but he beat the ambulance there. And so anyway, he goes in and he comes back out and he's got the look on his face and he says, yeah, she's gone. So anyway, we shut the whole place down and crime scene time now. And anyway, it's investigated and they find a receipt right next to her body that fell out of the guy's pocket when he had raped her and some other things. And anyway, they fell out of his pocket and they confirmed later through the coroner's investigation, of course, and the coroner, when they did the autopsy, that she'd been raped and sodomized and some other things. And anyway, make a long story short, they went ahead and arrested this guy, and he lived 3 or 4 houses down, and he was 19 years old. And anyway, he had a prior history of sexual assault, and and I went to court on him, trial on him months later, and he's found guilty, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. After a year,
only 25.
Well, after year 2, he was killed in prison. He was killed in Folsom. So anyway,
that's too bad.
Yeah. So he was killed in Folsom after 2 years doing a sentence in Folsom. So I think he was 22 years old when he was killed. So anyway, so that was one of the most memorable cases. It was front page news on the San Jose Mercury, and of course, and I've got a letter of accommodation on it because not disturbing the crime scene, and I didn't do much, but I mean, I think they were just feeling sorry for me. And the sergeant wrote me a letter of accommodation because they solved the case. And the crime scene wasn't disturbed, and they did find the receipt that made the case. And anyway, come to find out, his picture was printed in the Mercury News when they made the arrest. And a picture of him handcuffed, and it was a front kind of shot of him walking him to the police car, and his hands are behind his back. And a San Jose hospital nurse, she worked at San Jose, works in the ER, says, that's the guy that raped me.
Oh my gosh.
She identified him from that picture, and they did some, this was, like I say, this was before DNA and stuff, so they just went on her word. And she's coming out from work one night, late at night, 2, 3 in the morning, and he was waiting out in the parking lot for her, pulled her into her car and raped her in the car. And she had reported it, and they had a description and everything. And this was before DNA. And I don't remember all the details of the rape or anything, but I do know that he was found guilty of that also. And she testified in court and ID'd him, pulled him out of a lineup and everything. And so they did him for that, and then did him for the little girl. And he got 25 years for the 10-year-old, but I don't know if he even went to trial. I think they didn't even try him on the rape case because due to the fact that he got 25 years. I don't think they thought it would be beneficial or whatever. And I don't remember now exactly what happened on that case, but it's kind of neat that she identified him in the picture on the front page of the Mercury News. Hey, that's the guy that raped me.
I feel like that's something you wouldn't forget. So
yeah, for sure. And that was the days too before rape was totally investigated. For the most part, my experience has been with, especially with the sexual assault unit and stuff, was in those days that it was, this was, like I say, you hit the nail on the head when you talk about DNA and stuff, evidence and forensics and all that. But it was she said, he said type thing. So there was a lot of cases like that were real shaky in the sense that there was not a lot of backup. It was her word against his word, and that type of thing.
Hearsay.
Who had the best lawyer? And it's kind of scary to think about that, but that's kind of the way it was. But anyway, it was a really interesting case, and like I say, he ended up getting killed in prison. He got killed in Folsom after a second year in Folsom. So anyway, good ending to the story.
It's those cases you don't forget, and they do always stick with you. Because I've had.
Yeah, I still picture it when I'm talking about it. I can picture it, and I picture the garage, and I still see it in my mind. It had a real imprint on me. I had trouble sleeping at night for a couple of months after that case, and I had kids. I think Jeff was. When was Jeff born? What year was Jeff born?
He was born in the 70s.
Yeah.
75.
Yeah, this was like 76, 77, 78. So he was just, 1 year, 2 years old, 3 years old. Maybe I don't remember the exact date when it occurred, but and I remember thinking about that with kids and stuff, and that really kind of hit too. You think differently after you have kids. So anyway, yeah, but it was one of the bigger cases that I got involved with, and I didn't do anything great in it or anything. It wasn't a whodunit type thing. It was pretty mundane in that sense that I was just lucky enough that it was at Mervyn's. I remember that even the receipt, it was from Mervyn's, and that was when Mervyn's that really gives you a time because there's no longer Mervyn's. There was a Mervyn's on the east side. It was just up the street, and he had bought something at Mervyn's, and that's what the receipt was from. It was in his name with a credit card or something. I think is what ended up happening. That's how they made him on the case. But anyway, it was a very interesting case.
One of the things Amy and I talked about on our first episode was she didn't have any counseling available to her after the cases. And, we've laughed and joked about like bad juju following you home. Amy says she'll sage her house. I said, read the Bible on you and get all the bad juju. But did you have any counseling available?
We had it available. There's a thing in law enforcement. And this guy, we have a psychiatrist. He's an educated psychiatrist, very well educated. He ended up doing a lot of counseling for police officers and stuff. And you could go to him if you had a problem, if you had some type of cases. A lot of guys used him and stuff. But for the most part, when he first came on, and he just started working when I had this case, matter of fact, and cops were afraid to go to him because they're afraid that you'd tell him something and it would get back to the administration and they'd take you off duty, and they didn't trust. There was no trust there. And this guy was straight up and he says, well, it's a doctor-client privilege. I cannot you tell me something. I cannot report that back to the administration unless you say something stupid like, I just killed 3 people or something, or, for the most part, there was not a lot of trust there. And then guys started trusting him and then it worked out. But you could go to him for counseling and that type of thing. And he could recommend counseling if he couldn't handle it. But he did a lot of counseling, a lot of marriage counseling. Cops have always been known to that. I'm one of the few guys that still have my original wife, or had my original wife.
Yeah, she put up with you for 50 years.
55. I'm counting the 5 years. I'm taking credit for the 5 years that I dated her too. But anyway, there was a lot of divorces. A lot of cops are known for that, and for the most part, and a lot of marriage counseling and a lot of problems in that sense. And heavy duty cases. Some guys are overworked. They see it all the time. I know one guy a friend of mine that worked sexual assault and got involved with the minors, and it's just too much, and it's just so much of it that he went over the edge. And he was actually, they took him off duty, and he disappeared for 6 months, and everybody gave him a bad time about it, but he was hurt. And he disappeared for 6 months, and everybody gave him a bad time because they said 6 months paid vacation because they paid him, of course, and he didn't do anything. But he went through a lot of counseling and a lot of classes and some other things they put him in, and he was much better for it as a result of it. And they, of course, took him off for that unit, put him in a kind of a more mundane type unit where it wasn't working as much, seeing that kind of thing all the time. And but you could see the result of it, and he was a mess. And fortunately, they pulled him out and got him help and stuff. But you're right, though. It gets to a lot of the cops too. A lot of cops had problems, and that's why the police department hired the psychologist. He's an employee of the city of San Jose, and I guess they still have him. I know now. I think he's got 2 assistants or something, or that it's probably a new guy. But I heard that they expanded the unit, and they've got a couple other guys and that's all they do is counseling. And then they also have a minister, a chaplain, and he's over inundated. He was doing it free just on the weekends and was doing funerals and for the police officers' families and that type of thing. And he got involved in a little counseling, and all of a sudden he got over inundated, and his schedule is pretty tough. And he's doing nothing but counseling now too. So there's a lot of problems with police officers have a lot of big problems with that, and seeing a lot of stuff they see and put through a lot of stuff, and they bring it home. And then what happens is it kind of gets crazy at home, and they don't, a lot of officers have trouble with it. And that's why the divorce rate is, getting back to that, I'm one of the few guys that stayed married over my career that I can think of. That and Marianne would have chased me down and, hunted me down anyway. But
and Marianne probably would have been on our podcast.
Yeah. Marianne would have chased me down. But anyway, left her with a kid or something, she would have found me. But anyway, I was very lucky in that sense that I've only had one wife, and that's very rare in the police department these days. And back in those days, even, the divorce rate was atrocious.
I think it still is. And I know that, especially with the child crime units, the turnover rate in just those guys don't stay in that for very long.
Yeah, it's tough. And that's why they have limits on, they put a lot of limits now. Some guys would get into a unit and they really liked it. You can work homicide and maybe be a very good investigator and stay in there for 10, 15 years. But the problem is, can you take it for 10 or 15 years? Most of the units now are limited to 3 to 5 years, and they put a limitation on it, and especially sexual assault and some of those type heavy duty. And I know homicide is another one that keeps seeing that and doing that, and it just never goes away. You know what I mean? It just hangs with you, and so I can understand that what a problem that could be. So anyway, it has been a problem, and I think they're addressing it pretty good, and they rotate guys through now pretty quick. But every once in a while, you'll still hear something of some guy or some lady that is working too much or overloaded, or inundated with cases, and all of a sudden just can't take it anymore. Something crazy happens or does something, and so anyway, very interesting. Most people don't see it that way or see that. So anyway, it's kind of interesting.
Amy, did you guys have a time limit on what you could do or what kind of cases you could work?
No, actually, I don't think it really mattered. It was like, you need to go cover this area. Someone's off, you need to cover extra area. And I can remember working a 32-hour shift, and it didn't matter if you had worked 6 scenes and you had been driving, you were falling asleep while driving, working a child homicide, and then you worked in the morgue and you collected evidence on that. And especially if it was a child sexual assault case, I can remember working very horrific child sexual assault cases, and then being emotional about that, and then telling me you can't show that emotion, that negative emotion. And so literally going to my truck and calling mom and crying about it, because if you showed that, you got in trouble. And it was almost like we were punished for being human beings.
That's a good way to put it. That's very true. Very exact. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. You're not allowed to show any emotion or anything, and heaven forbid if you show any emotion or something. And it's hard sometimes to do that. You're human, and stuff does affect you. But I was pretty good at it, and it's just I don't know why, but I it would get to me after, and I'd come home and sit there and think about it, and it's not that I forgot about it or anything, but it stuck with me.